Sunday morning
Good evening. Can you all hear me?
with the tennis shoes.
Okay. How about everybody in the back? Can you hear me? Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. We're going to start in about 5 minutes just because I understand there are still some people coming in. Just wanted to let you know we're going to be another 5 minutes or less. Okay? Thank you.
Are we sitting in the right places?
Does mine
What's
say
the date
Ryder?
today?
I was gonna say, does that say Ryder?
Today's October 24th. When did we actually learn of this case?
I sent an email on October 1st in the evening after seeing the clip on WBOC.
So we're 24 days into this thing,
24
and think
days.
about everything that we've accomplished so far.
Well, it's like everything. The more you do it, the better you get.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
So, Phil-
This team knows what to do.
I'll never forget your response when I sent it that night at 6 o'clock the next morning. Put this in for our next meeting on the tour. That's what you said. And then I think we learned, about 2 days later, there were 17 PIAs. And then you said, change of course.
Yeah, your voice is loud. It's picking me up.
Let me tell them not to.
Well, I could hear you. Broadcast.
I know, but I just thought he turned all these off. I told him during the Q&A maybe he's on, but not right now. I think the Q&A.
Good evening. So my name is Philip Federico. I'm with the law firm of Baird, Mandalas, Brockstedt, and Federico. It's nice to have everybody here. You really never know what's going to happen. Sort of like having a party where you send out invitations and you don't know if anybody's going to come. So this is a good turnout, but it's really indicative, I think, of the significance of the problem and people's interest in fixing the problem, which is why we're here. We're here to tell you about the problem and tell you how we intend to work with the community and work with Purdue to fix it. So let me go to our first slide. Why are we here? And if you look down, and I know some of you in the back probably can't see this very well, but on the right, this is the Purdue wastewater disposal. This is the actual pipe that goes into Peggy's branch that actually carries wastewater from the plant that contains PFAS right into that water supply. And then here we have a sample of a spray irrigation rig which disposes of wastewater. This wastewater then seeps into the groundwater and eventually into your wells. And so go to the next slide. And I want to show you a little clip from the news, which is really a good summary of where we are at the moment.
A new finding in the search for answers after forever chemicals were discovered. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight here for the news at 6. I'm Steve Hammond. The Maryland Department of the Environment tells WBOC that Purdue Farms is, quote, a responsible person for the contamination. WBOC's Hunter Landon is on the story again tonight. Hunter, that determination means Purdue is tasked with the cleanup.
Steve, the company sent out letters to 550 property owners where it says wells should be tested. MDE confirmed today that one well on Purdue's property had PFAS levels at more than 1,300 parts per trillion. The EPA standard is no more than 4 parts per trillion. A spokesperson for the law firm says more people have reached out since the suit was announced. It cites the negative health impacts exposure to PFAS could cause. The chemicals have been linked to cancer and other health problems. That suit asks for PFAS contamination to end and for financial compensation from Purdue for lost property value. The Maryland Department of the Environment tells WBOC the PFAS were discovered at Purdue's agribusiness property, seen here from Chopper 16. More details emerging in a potential environmental crisis in Wicomico County. And one more note on the lawsuit. The plaintiffs are also seeking funding for a medical monitoring program that is tailored to the exposure risks posed by PFAS.
So why are we here? Well, that's a real good summary of why we're here. But why are we, this group, here? We learned, frankly, as a result of testing that was done by MDE. And MDE is the Maryland Department of the Environment. They're responsible for making sure that the environment in Maryland stays clean, that we have clean drinking water and we have clean air. They did testing, as did Purdue, of Purdue's groundwater, their monitoring wells, and their wastewater, which contained extraordinary high levels of PFAS. We also learned about Purdue sending those letters out, which indicated that they knew they had a problem to over 500 homes. They wanted permission to test the drinking water, and they offer bottled water to residents, which is a good thing to do, one of the appropriate thing to do. Our law firm recently handled a case in the Millsboro community in Sussex County involving Mount Air chicken. Now, the contaminant there was nitrates, it wasn't PFAS, but everything else about that case was very similar to what is going on in this case. They were taking their wastewater that had too much nitrate in it and putting it into the groundwater, and people were getting sick, getting cancer, etc. In that case, we settled the case for $205 million. $140 million went to what's called remediation, or fixing the problem. So if you live in that community today, you have clean water and you have clean air, and you will for the foreseeable future. So our law firm's experience with PFAS in particular is ongoing. Currently, we have a case against WL Gore. These are the people that make Gore-Tex. Many of you probably wear, gear, or if you hunt like I do, I wear Gore-Tex gear. And the contaminant PFAS is actually used to make Gore-Tex. Well, this PFAS is in the groundwater in Cecil County and has been for about 2 decades now. And we currently have a lawsuit where we represent a proposed class and a class action for this community of more than 5,000 people. So we currently represent dozens of water providers as well, not just people, but actually companies that provide water, and municipalities in the MDL in South Carolina in federal court that involves PFAS. So we have a lot of experience when it comes to PFAS litigation. The law and the science behind these cases is something that we deal with every day, we've been dealing with for years, and we're actually experts. We have great expertise in this area. I'd like to bring up my partner, Chase Brockstedt, who's going to take it from here.
Thank you, Phil.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. My name is Chase Brockstedt. So who are we? So I want to talk a little bit about our legal team. Obviously, you've just heard from Phil. Brent Series and Ray Fitch, who I think Brent may be arriving a little bit late tonight. He may be here by now. Ray's not going to be able to come tonight. Kathy Kramer and Stella Pratt are both here, and Matt Legg is part of our team as well. We have handled a number of cases. You heard Phil talk about the Mount Air case, which was the one in Sussex County, Delaware, and Millsboro. We just finished a case in South Carolina against a paper plant by the name of New Indy. Unlike that case, this was, unlike this case, that was an air case. We don't know exactly whether or not air is a component, air emissions is a component of this case or not. Right now, we're focused on the groundwater contamination. Phil also talked a little bit about our experience in the Gore case and the PFAS MDL. Camp Lejeune is another case, environmental contamination case that we're working on as well. But everybody knows that the lawyers aren't the smart people. The smart people are the scientists. And so in these types of cases, we utilize environmental experts and environmental consultants, and we have several of those with us tonight. In the Mount Air case that Phil talked about briefly before, by the time we filed our complaint in that case, we had more than a dozen experts, and I think that by the time that the case was really going, I think we had upwards of 16 or 17. Same thing with the Gore case that we are prosecuting right now. But our environmental consultants, 3 of which we have here tonight, Deborah Jennings, Roger Truitt, Dr. Harvey Cohen, and then we also have an environmental wastewater expert, Ken Norcross. So we're going to talk a little bit about PFAS and its regulations, and I'd like to introduce you all to Deborah Jennings. We represent, the legal team that you saw up there, we represent plaintiffs. We represent folks that are harmed through the mismanagement or the lack of environmental compliance against corporate defendants. Deborah spent her career representing corporate defendants before she found the light and switched to our side. She graduated with honors from the University of Maryland and Georgetown University Law Center. She was a partner at DLA Piper, a global law firm, for more than 30 years, and she chaired their national environmental practice for more than 20 years. We've been working with Deborah. We've been fortunate enough to be working with Deborah since 2018, and she's a big part of our team, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about PFAS and its regulations.
Thank you, Chase. Good evening. I'm Deborah Jennings. I'd like to talk to you about what these chemicals are, and then from a 50,000-foot level, what law governs them, how they're regulated. And that will kind of set the stage for more specific discussion about the investigation that we've undertaken. And that'll be from my 2 colleagues who are on the panel up there. First of all, what are PFAS? PFAS are initials. I'm only going to say this once because it's hard to say. Perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS. PFAS is actually the abbreviation for the entire group of chemicals, and then each chemical within that has its own set of initials, so literally it becomes an alphabet soup of chemicals. But these chemicals have certain common characteristics, and they're dangerous. So from here on, I'm going to refer to them as forever chemicals, and I'll help to explain why. They are man-made, lab-made chemicals, and as I mentioned, the entire group is referred to as PFAS, but it includes certain specific substances that are of interest in this case. One is PFOS, one is PFOA, and another is PXHXS, 3 different substances that have been tested for at elevated levels at the Purdue facility. So we're especially focused on those 3. Now, why are they called forever chemicals? Because they tend not to biodegrade. They just stay in the environment, and they stay in the human body. So they call them forever chemicals because unlike other things where the action of weather and time and so on causes them to biodegrade in the environment, with these substances, they don't, or they do to a very, very limited extent. They were widely used in industry, and they're also used in the agricultural industry, and they have the potential to accumulate in agricultural raw materials such as soybean. Now, we don't know yet. We're continuing to investigate how exactly this got into your groundwater, but we do know that soybean is certainly a major area of concern because of the potential for them to accumulate. And we also know, as I mentioned, that PFAS, PFOA, and PFHXS, those forever chemicals, were in the Purdue agribusiness groundwater. Now, why does this matter? What's the significance of having these chemicals? First of all, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, known as IARC, which is part of the World Health Organization, reviews health studies on these substances and makes determinations. And they have identified them as being, the major ones, as either being carcinogenic or potentially carcinogenic to human beings. So they're extremely dangerous substances. They include increased risk of cancer, especially prostate, kidney, testicular cancer. You can have decreased fertility or increased blood pressure during pregnancy particularly. There are developmental delays in children. And by the way, because children are small, their bodies are small, they're much more susceptible to the danger than adults would be. So it's especially a concern for children. You can have reduced immune response, you can have interference with hormones, increased cholesterol, and/or obesity. And I will tell you, these are the established risks, but this is an evolving area of science, and we have experts who study it. There are many more potentially implicated diseases and risks to humans. When EPA, just this summer, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but when they wrote their most recent rule that applies to drinking water, they said there is, and I quote, "There's no level of exposure to these two PFAS," this is PFOS and PFOA, present in this case, "without risk of health impacts." There's no safe level of exposure. Now, EPA, we're talking about United States Environmental Protection Agency. It's a federal agency in DC. But how does this work exactly? Congress writes statutes. EPA then develops regulations within the mandate of the environmental statute. And then what happens across the country is the states write look-alike regulations that have to be virtually identical to what EPA has written. So the source of the law really comes from EPA. And I've been watching EPA for 30 plus years. I won't tell you how many, but a lot. And I've never seen them react in the way they've reacted to these chemicals. They formed a council in 2021, and the purpose of that council, it was focused on PFAS, and the purpose of that council was to accelerate the development of the law in a number of different areas, all focused on PFAS. So they started out with a health advisory, and this is while they were working on regulations. They had a health advisory, and you can see how low that number is. Let's see, 0.004 parts per trillion. I mean, this is a minute number, and as I have just told you, they now think 0 is a more appropriate number for health, when you're looking only at health. This past year, they promulgated a number of rules under different statutes, all aimed at PFAS. One is they characterized certain PFAS, including the two we're interested in here, as hazardous constituents, which means, this is under the hazardous waste law and the Superfund cleanup law, you may have heard of those. What it means is it gives the agencies and individuals in citizen suits the power to sue someone who has contaminated the environment with these substances to make them clean it up. It creates the power to require corrective action. That was in February of this year. More recently, in April, and this is very significant here, they wrote the rule that applies to drinking water. Now, as I mentioned, the prior action in 2022 had been a health advisory. It was just guidance, it wasn't regulatory. So this is the first time they've created a regulation that applies. So in 2024, they promulgated a regulation that establishes a 4 part per trillion regulatory limit for drinking water and 10 for the third substance that is present here. Now you notice 4 is a much bigger number than 0.004. Does that mean they found it less dangerous? No. What it means is that when they write the standard for drinking water, the statute requires them to take into account the cost of treating the water. So once they take into account the cost and also the ability to test for the substance, the number gets larger. But at the same time they wrote this regulatory standard, which is called a maximum contaminant level, they also wrote a maximum contaminant level goal of 0, because 0 is where they think there is no risk, only at the number 0. But even at 4 ppt, compare that to some of the findings we have already, 1,300 parts per trillion. I mean, it's a dramatically higher number that has been found. Now, technically, these regulations apply directly to a public a public water supply, but the same number would apply to your drinking water. If there were a cleanup, the same number would apply, the 4 part per trillion. So when we see numbers like 1,300 parts per trillion, it's very alarming. Those are very big numbers. And finally, EPA has promulgated rules in other areas. They have maximum concentrations in the receiving water, like Peggy's Branch. And you notice all of these things have happened in 2024. That's the result of huge focus by EPA on the subject of PFAS. So where does Maryland come in? As I mentioned, EPA oversees what the states do, and then once they approve a state's program, which is a look-alike for the federal one, then the states are the hands-on implementers, enforcers. So that's MDE's role here. They're actually the ones charged with implementing the standards, including the 4 ppt. Now, what have they done so far? Unfortunately, we don't know. They're not telling us. We would like to have them tell us, but we don't know. We do know that they've designated Purdue as a responsible person for PFAS contamination. They've found that Purdue's wastewater contains, as I mentioned, PFOS, PFOA, and the third forever chemical, and that the numbers were very high, 1,300 compared to 4. These results are very alarming, and they have led us to begin a comprehensive investigation of the groundwater plume to see how many of you are impacted by the elevated levels. So with that, let me turn it over to Roger, who's going to talk about the plume.
Thank you, Deborah. All right, so you know a little bit about who we are. We know what we're dealing with now as it relates to PFAS. We've been investigating this case for all of 24 days at this point in time, so we're pretty early on in our investigation. However, I'd like to talk to you about what we do know. And to do that, we've got one of our environmental consultants. His name is Roger Truitt. We've been working with Roger since 2017. Roger also, before becoming a lawyer, he was an environmental engineer. He then chose to get into the business of law, started representing the wrong side of the V, was also representing corporate defendants like Deborah. He was a partner in one of the largest private law firms in Maryland for 21 years. He was a practicing environmental engineer in Maryland and Delaware, and he's been serving as our technical, environmental, and legal consultant in cases, like I said, since 2017. Roger?
Thank you, Chase, and good evening, folks. Wow, what a crowd that's turned out tonight. Thank you. I'm going to take you through, let's get that ugly picture off of there that's probably at least 20 years old. I'm going to take you through some figures, maps, to help you see what we've learned so far As you've heard from others, we're still in the early stages of an investigation. So I'm going to do a little geography here. Probably most of you know this area, but for those that might not, let me point out a few things on the map here. First of all, this is the Route 50 bypass of Salisbury, which then goes out to Ocean City. And of course, you got the old Ocean City road here. And here's, right here, that's not circled, is the Purdue headquarters and technical center. The site that we're looking at is another Purdue facility in this circle, which they call their agribusiness facility. It's quite large. It's approximately 200 acres, and the industrial part of it is in this area, and we'll focus in on that in a minute. But let me point out a few other things. First of all, it's on 6906 Zion Church Road. The top part of this is north, this is south. Over here we have east, and here we have west. And as you'll hear from our groundwater expert in a few minutes, we understand that the groundwater is moving from east toward west. So right in here, for example, is a community called Heather Glen, if you're familiar with that. Yeah. And a couple of other things that I want to point out that we'll be talking about in a minute are a couple of streams. First of all, just on the south side of the Purdue facility, there's a railroad, and just beyond that, there's Peggy's Branch. Peggy's Branch runs up this dark green here all the way through into Johnson's Pond, which then goes into the Wycomico River. But on its way, it's going through a number of residential communities that are on private wells. There's another stream to the north, which is called Middle Neck Branch. It's coming through this dark green area, and eventually it joins Peggy Branch down in here. Let's see. I think that's enough on that one. Let's go to the next slide. So what do they do at the Purdue Agribusiness Facility on Zion Church Road? There basically are three operations. They're listed there. This is a huge complex, industrial complex. So they do multiple things that have come online over the years. This facility goes back to something like the 1960s or before, when it was just a grain storage and feed mill. But then they added on to it, and they put in a soybean oil extraction process. And what that does is it crushes soybeans and brings the oil out of them, and then the solid part, after some more processing, becomes feed for animals. So then they take the soybean oil that's been extracted, and they take it to a refinery that's also on the site. And it refines the crude oil coming out of the soybean into a more refined state that can be used for other purposes. They also bring in crude oil from three other Purdue facilities and refine it here. So this is a very significant operation for Purdue, particularly with its oil refinery. And just to give you an idea, the refinery will, according to Purdue's own publication, handles 350 million pounds of oil every year at this facility. They load up tank trucks, tank cars, ship them all over the country. And they bring in soybeans from all over the country and from other countries to process at this facility. Now, the main thing we've been looking at so far is the wastewater that's generated at this facility. And first of all, the documents we have seen to date, which are available publicly, indicate that Purdue discharges almost 1 million gallons of wastewater per day. And it's this wastewater that contains very high levels of the PFAS compounds that Deborah was speaking of just a minute ago. The major sources of the wastewater at the facility, and by the way, we're looking here at the wastewater plant, which consists of some tanks, aerated lagoon, storage lagoon, in any event, the major sources, the soy oil extraction plant where they crush the soybeans that I mentioned, they indicate that there's 70,000 gallons of water, wastewater being generated per day. Similarly, for the oil refinery, another 70,000. And then there's a lot of cooling water that comes from the soybean extraction process. And they also have some hatcheries on the site that generate wastewater. The important thing to note is that this wastewater treatment plant right here does nothing to remove PFAS from the wastewater. And how do I know that? Well, Chase mentioned Ken Norcross, who's not here tonight, but we've worked with him on 4 or 5 cases. He's one of the foremost wastewater experts in the country. He's been looking at industrial facilities like this and working with them, troubleshooting for the last 40 years. And he has like 19 patents on wastewater treatment. Well, I sent all the background documents to Ken Norcross, and I said, Ken, so he knows what each of these processes is, does anything here remove PFAS? He says, not at all. And I said, well, could we remove the PFAS? Oh, yes. You can put in systems that will do that, but you'd have to greatly upgrade the plant at a huge expense. Okay, I want to talk a little more about how the wastewater is being disposed of. I mentioned Peggy's Branch. Again, let me orient you on the map here. Here's the wastewater treatment plant. This is the oil refinery here, we believe. These are grain storage tanks. And in here, we believe, is where the soybean crushing operation is. I mentioned there's a hatchery down in this area as well. So what Purdue has been doing is they've been spray irrigating part of the wastewater, about 20% we estimate, onto this large field. This is about 40 acres, and they have a center pivot irrigation rig here. They don't do it year-round. They do it at certain times when there's supposed to be crops on there that are going to take up the nitrogen. But the crops don't take up the PFAS. So the PFAS goes down to the groundwater, as Phil had mentioned earlier. The other thing they do is they spray irrigate into this forest area. And we're not sure exactly where in the forest, but you see those little lines? Those generally are places where they can run pipelines and get access to maintain that spray irrigation. Now, 80% of their wastewater, 80% of nearly 1 million gallons a day, is going to Peggy's Branch. And here's Peggy's Branch. You see this blue line here that I'm following? Okay, right down here. Well, guess where Peggy's Branch starts? The headwaters is right here at their wastewater treatment plant. So the only water going into this part of Peggy's Branch is what's coming out of the wastewater treatment plant and cooling water that might be coming here. And then it comes down through Peggy's Branch, and we'll see where it goes a little later when Dr. Cohen speaks. So Deborah spoke about some of the high levels. I think she referred to them as alarming, and I would agree. What you see here in this figure, again, the same background. This is the wastewater treatment, the spray irrigation, Peggy's Branch. Here's the EPA drinking water standard, which again isn't necessarily safe based on the science that's been done. For these two compounds, PFAS compounds, the current limit is 4 parts per trillion. And for this one other one that we have found present, it's 10 parts per trillion. So what do we know so far? We know that the Peggy's Branch discharge from Purdue has been, their wastewater that's being discharged into Peggy's Branch has been tested, and it's been reported that the PFOS concentration is 694. The PFOA is 40. Okay, so those numbers are obviously, in this case, it's more than 10 times the standard. In the case of PFOA, it's 4 times. There also has been testing performed on the groundwater, and we don't know exactly where the test was done, but we believe it was done in this field. And the level that's been reported for the groundwater on the site is $1,370 for PFOS and $1,300 for this other PFAS compound, PFHXS. Again, very high numbers, 300 to 400 times the standard that EPA has set. So this figure shows, again, this is the actual pipe that the wastewater treatment plant is dumping into Peggy's Branch. And in a drought condition like we're having now, that's going to be the only water in Peggy's Branch. So we have almost 1 million gallons of this PFAS contaminated wastewater being disposed each day. 80% is going to Peggy's Branch. 20% is being irrigated to cropland and forest land north. And again, not year-round on the spray irrigation. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I'll let Chase introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. So as I've mentioned a couple of times now, our investigation is ongoing. One of the things that we did right away was we engaged an expert that we've been using since 2018, Dr. Harvey Cohen, who is with us tonight. Dr. Cohen is a principal hydrogeologist at SS Papadopoulos and Associates. He graduated from Princeton University and Cornell University. He is an expert in mapping sort of groundwater flow, the fate and the transport of water contaminant. He's got over 50 publications and presentations. He's been somebody that we've been working closely with for a long time now, and he's going to tell you about, at this point in time, what our investigation has revealed.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm Harvey Cohen. I work with Papadopoulos and Associates. We're based in Rockville, Maryland. And my job here is to understand where the groundwater contamination might be going from this facility. So as you all know, we're here because there is no doubt there is groundwater contamination on the Purdue facility. It's very high. But the question then becomes, well, where is it going? Who might be exposed to it and how? As was mentioned before, I'm an expert in groundwater. For those of you who don't know, groundwater is simply water that's underground. In the case of Salisbury, we're talking about an aquifer, which is just a geologic unit that has a lot of water in it, which is mostly sand. And you probably recognize this when you're digging your garden. There's a lot of sand out here. You're taking water from your residential wells from an aquifer that's very sandy. The water flows between the sand grains. In this case, this is what we call an unconfined aquifer. There's nothing on top of it to protect it from contamination that's released to the surface. So the state would classify this as an aquifer that's susceptible to surface contamination. And that's why it's of concern to all of you who are on private wells in this area. I'm going to talk about where the groundwater is likely going, how fast it's moving, and the impact of what creates the changes in where groundwater flows. As Phil and Chase have both said, this is very early for us. We just started, so there's a lot of detail still to fill in terms of what is the extent of observed contamination and where it's going. So the first thing I did when I was asked to look at this problem about 10 days ago, 15 days ago, was what information is there about the regional flow of groundwater? Well, there's some publications from the Maryland Geologic Survey and the US Geologic Survey that talk about the flow of groundwater contamination. And those arrows on the map there show in a very general sense which way the groundwater is flowing. This map is not specific to your neighborhood or the area immediately west of the facility, but it does show this as part of a larger groundwater mapping exercise. And as you can see, the general flow of groundwater would be west and southwest from the edge of the Purdue facility. That means that the contaminants that travel with the groundwater, like this PFAS, would be flowing in that direction. Now, you also notice that down on the bottom left, I have a circle around what's called the Park Well Field. That is a well field that's serving the city of Salisbury. They pump a lot of water from there. And I pointed out, simply to point out that there are some factors that can affect which way the groundwater flow. Well fields for a city tend to draw a lot of water towards them, And in the case of the Park Well Field, the mapping done by the Maryland Geologic Survey shows it is in fact pulling water a little bit more to the south when you get over to that side of the town. But in general, we focused our investigation so far in the area west of the facility because that's where we believe the groundwater is flowing that would be carrying contaminants from Purdue. If you look at this map here, it just shows again the sort of pink area that is our initial focus area. We don't know where we're going to wind up in terms of what is the extent of contamination. There may be reasons why there's contamination outside of the zone. We just don't know yet. We're only, like I say, a couple weeks into the investigation. As many of you know, we've sent out letters on behalf of our client. We've been sampling wells, and we'll continue to do that to get some hard data as to where the contamination is and where it's moving to. Some of the results collected from the neighborhood are shown on this map. The numbers that Deborah was talking about on the right for the facility show PFOS and PFHXS over 1,000 parts per trillion. You've heard that already. But we've collected about 20 samples as of today in the neighborhood and some surface water samples as well. And some of those are quite high too, concentrations over 100 or 300 or even 900 in one location. So that is of concern. It's also consistent with our model of groundwater flowing to the west from the facility, and it's the same compounds in the water that we're observing, the PFOS, PFOA, and PFHXS, that were observed on site. So again, this is consistent with the conceptual model we have of how the groundwater is flowing and where there may be homes that might be impacted by it. I'm going to hand it over now back to Chase. Oh, to Phil. Okay. Thank you very much. Sure. That map?
If you all want to take pictures of any slides after we finish, we can pull up specific slides for you. So, okay, not much more. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the lawsuit that was filed very recently by us. It's filed as a class action lawsuit. And I want to talk with you a little bit about, it's a 40-page complaint that our team of a dozen attorneys and paralegals were able to put together after just 24 days, less than 24 days of investigation. It is available to you if you want to read it. It's available online. We can always send you a copy. But I want to talk a little bit about what a class action is. You know, this is not a situation where you get in the mail a coupon for a toaster you bought 3 years ago. It's a little bit more serious than that. And you say, well, why a class action? Well, you look around this room right now, and you have to understand that you people have the power. You know, when one of you goes individually and tries to deal with a corporation the size of Purdue, you really don't have any power. But when you all band together like you have tonight, and like I think the rest of your community will do, you can deal with this problem, they will listen, and they will fix it. So there's power in numbers. So to the extent that anybody hasn't signed up to participate in the case, we encourage you to do so because we want to have you help us help you. That's what we want to do. The other benefit here is something called shared cost. We're going to spend, and we typically spend, probably between $3 and $5 million of our money. We advance it in this case. Why? Because we know it's a good case. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Why? Because hopefully we'll get our money back, okay? And I think we will. But that cost will not be borne by just one or two clients. It'll be borne by the class as a whole. We don't know how big this class is going to be. We know now it's at least 500 homes. It's probably going to be more. 2.5 people per household. So you can do the math. It's going to be a big class. I want to talk a little bit about the liability issues. This is a very strong case because the Maryland Department of the Environment has already said to Purdue, hey, this is your problem. You're a responsible party. So when we walk into a court in front of a jury, guess what we get to say? Hey, MDE, the Maryland Department of the Environment, said Purdue created this problem. Okay, it makes our job a little easier on liability. I want to talk a little bit about the extent of the impacted area. And you've heard it repeatedly, I'm going to say it again, 24 days. We know what we know, okay? It was interesting, the last case we did in South Carolina, when I got in front of the court for the very first time, our impact zone was a circle. And it was 3.5 mile circle. And the judge said, well, how is this possibly, it's a perfect circle. How is this the impact area? I said, it's not. She said, well, you say it is. I said, it is now, but when this case is over, it's not going to be a circle, it's going to be very irregular, and it's probably going to be bigger. And so we've made some progress already. We didn't show you a circle, but the shape will change a little bit, and it'll probably get bigger the more wells we test. And what we do is we start at the source, we work our way out, and when we start finding normal results, we know where to draw the lines. So that's what we're going to be doing. You can help us by signing up. You can help us figure out how big this impacted area is. Next, I want to talk about the damages. There are basically 3 buckets of damages in this case. And I have them in a particular order because this first bucket, called remediation, is the most important. If you came here to get rich, you came to the wrong place, because that's not our goal, okay? Our goal is to fix the problem first and foremost. And that's what remediation is all about. So that's why it's first. So how do you remediate, which really means fix the problem? How do you do that? Well, you go to the source where the PFAS is coming from, and you turn it off. You stop the problem. Now, you heard from Roger Truitt say, there is a way to go to this facility and extract the PFAS from the wastewater before you put it into Peggy's branch and before you spray it into the forest or onto the field. We're going to do that, okay? We're going to do that. That's what we do. That's what we've done in our other cases. So you clean up the source of the problem. What do you do about all this water that's in the ground for years? Okay, well, there are a couple ways to deal with that. One of the ways is called pump and treat, where you actually pull it out of the ground, you treat it, you put it back in. It's a little expensive, but it's a way to treat it. And there's certain areas will really benefit a great deal by that. The other way to do it is filters. You know, you can put filters in homes, they're expensive, but that will solve the problem. You certainly don't want to be drinking with this water. You don't want to be bathing in this water. You don't want to be watering your garden with this water. And for you people that live, you know, on farms and grow crops, you don't want to be using this water for your crops or for your livestock, okay? So we're going to get you clean water. That's the other thing we do. And then the next thing we'll move to is talk a little bit about your property. You know, your property is not worth today what it was a month or 2 ago. It's just a fact of life, okay? There is a stigma associated with environmentally contaminated real estate, and that's unfortunately what we have to deal with in this case. We have experts who deal with real estate diminution, both rural and residential, and we will be able to figure out the loss for everybody's property. Finally, the health effects, which is probably the one that certainly tugs at me the most. My father used to tell me, if you have your health, you have everything. The rest of it you can figure out. But if you don't have your health, you really have nothing. And the most important thing we have and your community has is clean water and clean air. Because without it, we won't survive for very long, okay? So what we know is we know that this PFAS causes cancer, causes other diseases. And as you know with cancer, you know, you just can't step in front of a machine and it'll tell you whether or not you have cancer. You may have cancer in your body, but not know it for years. So in addition to taking care of the people who've already gotten sick, we need to medically monitor everybody in the community. Because the earlier you find cancer and these other diseases and treat it, the better the prognosis. So we will create a medical monitoring program for the community. So next steps, and I've talked about most of this, but we actually wrote to the Maryland Department of the Environment, and interestingly enough, they didn't send us the documents we wanted immediately. No surprise there. But we know them, they know us, and we're gonna stay on it, and we'll get their documents. We're gonna, as Chase said, we're gonna continue to retain additional experts, both environmental and health experts. We're gonna continue to figure out the size of this plume that's been contaminated and the size of the class. And then we are gonna work with our remediation experts to figure out how best to solve this problem. We wanna have a dialogue with Purdue and MDE. And I really want to say in conclusion, you know, I've lived in Maryland my whole life, and I've spent a good part of my life on the Eastern Shore. And I don't think Purdue's a bad company. I don't think they're bad people. But they have made a mistake. And I'm pretty optimistic that they're going to acknowledge that they've made a mistake. I'm pretty optimistic that they're going to hold themselves accountable and do the right thing. I can assure you that if they don't do the right thing, we will make sure they do, because that's what we do. So we will give them an opportunity to work with us in a collaborative way with the Maryland Department of the Environment to fix the problem and fix it now. See, our goal is we'd like to start the solution now instead of litigating this for 3 or 4 years and then start fixing the problem. So we will do our best to represent your community and get you the justice you're really entitled to. So at this point, we're going to do a little Q&A, and we have a microphone up here. And so if you're interested in asking a question, please line up, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
All these microphones up here? Go ahead.
I just have a question. For those of us that don't own our houses, we rent our houses, how do we go about with our landlords that got the letter that said nothing or did nothing? The only reason I know is because I'm one of the ones that came to you. So what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to be able to get what we need when our landlord won't go and do it? Do we do it ourselves, pay for it out of our pocket, submit everything to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, I mean, number one is, you know, if your landlord is not on notice of this problem, make sure that they are. It sounds like in your case that they are on notice of this problem. I think it'd be helpful to put it in writing to them so that they are aware of the fact that you want them to do something, whether it's to provide bottled water, whether it's to have a point of service whole house infiltration system.
Okay.
So the more you can document, the better. You know, worst case scenario, if your landlord does nothing, then I would take whatever steps you need to and whatever steps you can to protect your family.
Well, I know Culligan will provide for the families, like we were able to actually have water delivered to us, and they said we didn't need to go through the landlord for that. So I do know that is one option that we do have.
You should know that you do not need to be a property owner to be part of this case. Because you've been drinking this contaminated water and your family has, you're exposed to these health risks.
Okay.
You live in this community. The fact that you don't necessarily own property, you're still a member of the community, and the remediation we're seeking is for you, not just as an property owner, but for renters as well.
Okay.
So you should participate in the case.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank
Sure.
you. Go ahead.
Good evening. I've been living in my home for 30 years. I do own my home, and I'm on Barnesdale Drive. And I have an understanding, I read an article that it states that this has been going on since 1985, which that means it's 39 years. So now that the Maryland Department of Environment has found out this information from 2023, what I like to know is, how do we find out what happened in the last 39 years? Why now? Why did it take this long?
Sure. I mean, it's a great question. What I can tell you is that we know that their operation has been in business for a long time. And Roger, you may know some of the details on this about, how long they've been spray irrigating on that field, how long they maybe have been discharging in Peggy's Branch. We know it's been for many years. However, that doesn't mean that there has been PFAS contamination the entire time. We don't know how recently they began to use products or soybeans or as part of their manufacturing and refining process when PFAS got introduced to that. So we don't have any information to suggest, when that began. I doubt strongly that it's been going on for 39 years, but that's something that we hope to uncover as well.
Because I did see the article where it said that anyone who's lived in the community since 1985 for 6 months or worked in the community, that they can go ahead and sign a retainer. So that's where I'm like, well, then this has been going on. So there has to be some substance to, if you can sue if you lived in this area since 1985, that means that there has to be some kind of data that shows that what they've been doing for a while.
I think the 1985 came about because that's when we believe they began doing the spray irrigation,
Okay.
which we think is, for now, our current thinking is that's the primary source of the groundwater contamination. As Chase just said, there's no way we can know today whether or not PFAS was being sprayed in the wastewater. So we tried to be as broad as we could and go back that far. But you're right, the facility has been there longer, but in the original days, it was grain storage and a feed mill, and did not include these more industrialized processes of refining and soy oil extraction.
But there is water testing from the MDE, right? Or yearly or every,
MDE does not test the water
no? Okay.
yearly.
It does not,
Okay.
okay.
It's not like MDE has been keeping this a secret for 39 years.
Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm reminded politically, some of us old-timers remember Nixon. Some of us remember, us old-timers remember Nixon and Watergate, and the question back then posed regarding Nixon, what did he know and when did he know it? And who disclosed this, just for clarification? How was this disclosed and who disclosed this information and when?
Our current understanding, and some of this is what's been published in the newspapers, including the Baltimore Sun, is that in late 2023, MDE tested the wastewater at the facility, and those are the numbers that I had on my slide. And then they required Purdue to do some additional groundwater testing at the facility. And that was done, we understand, in April of this year. So before that, we don't have data or know of data that there was PFAS in the wastewater or the groundwater.
Okay, so we have April, May, June, July, August, September, and now we're getting drinking water from Purdue. I mean, it just seems a little bit too little too late to me. That's several months. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Mike Irving. I live 300 feet from the fence line at Purdue. I've been trying for years to get a MSD sheet from Purdue, which people may not know is a material safety data sheet that is required by anybody to be presented to them by request, and Purdue refuses. In fact, they actually want to kick me off their property because they won't answer the phone question about a MSDS sheet, material safety data sheet. And that's what my complaint is. They won't provide that to me. And that's all I have to say.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Let me respond to that just a little bit. This response should help all of you to understand a little bit better what we will be doing. Now that we have filed a lawsuit, they're required by law Purdue to file an answer to that lawsuit. There'll be a brief period of motions to dismiss if they elect to file them. They may not. But then we'll start a process called discovery, where we will request every document that's potentially related to this case. And it's going to be thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents. And we'll have teams of environmental reviewers going through every page of every document to find all the buried skeletons, so to speak, that will help us put this together. So today, at this point, we know a fraction of what ultimately we're going to know. We will also take the depositions of people like their environmental engineer. They have an environmental engineer. What did this person know and when did they know it? What did they do? What testing did they do on a regular basis? So there is a ton more for us to find out as we go through the process. Yes, sir.
I have a twofold question. One is the people that came to test our water. I called you and talked to you, and you said, go ahead and let Purdue test my water, which is sort of like the fox guarding the hen house because they created the problem. Now they're coming to test my water, and then they're going to offer the solution, which is a treatment system, which I'm not really interested in. If my well is polluted, they polluted it. The second part of, so I want to know, does bathing, drinking coffee, brushing your teeth, showering, swimming in my swimming pool, does that contaminate me? If my well is contaminated?
Yes.
That would be the first question.
The answer is yes.
Okay, yes.
However, let me just add that drinking water is the most significant risk as opposed to just touching. Going through your skin is much less of a risk. Drinking water is the primary.
Okay, I did kind of read that. Problem is that, when they sent the questionnaire, they asked if we drink the water. Well, right now, for the past year and a half or so, we have not. We've been drinking bottled water because my daughter is a fanatic about drinking water. And so we're drinking a lot of water now that is bottled. When we answered the questionnaire, we said, no, we don't drink the water, but we used to drink the water, and I've lived there for 30 years, still there. But anyway, so that answers my question there. Second part is you talked about home value. I put my home on the market a week or two before I received my letter from Purdue. What chance, I know you don't know the answer, but what chance am I going to have of selling my home? What realtor wants to bring a client to a stigma area where, they have contaminated well water? And what do I say? I called because I wanted to cover myself legally. What do I need to disclose to a potential buyer? Well, I have to, by Maryland law, and you told me to call a real estate attorney, which I did. And just to ask that question, what do I need to do as a responsible person trying to sell my home to somebody? So I have to disclose to someone who puts a contract on my home that we have a contaminated well, if we have a contaminated well, excuse me. But so if my well is contaminated, how am I going to be able to sell my house? And it was on the market before I knew this, and now I can't move to Florida to be with my daughter because I have health issues, and it's disrupted my life's plan. What do I do?
That's where we come in, because every person here has a similar story. It's just a little bit different.
Right.
So we're here to fix your problem and everybody else's problem.
Well,
And if Purdue wants to come and test your water and give you drinking water, just make sure you don't sign a release releasing your rights
Yeah, I would
to
never do that.
recovery.
I would never do that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's I know that in a class action lawsuit, there are going to be people here who have serious health issues. My neighbor has kidney cancer, okay? So I know someone, if my well isn't contaminated and we're only talking about a 10% loss of my home or 15% loss of the value of my home versus the fact that I can't sell my house and move on with my life's plan to move, that doesn't seem quite fair. So I read that in the Mount Air suit, some people received compensation of a couple $1,000s, some people received hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I know that the seriousness, and I understand that some people, I know for one of the plaintiffs, is a very serious problem. So anyways, it just doesn't seem, I don't know that I'm gonna be able to get to sell my home, and if I don't, am I gonna receive the value of my home that it was listed at? That's my problem.
That's a question I can't answer today, but I can get an answer for you.
Okay, well, how do I contact you to get an answer?
You go out in the hallway and meet with one of those people out there, and they can give you our contact information.
Thank you.
It's right up there.
Good evening, and good evening, neighbors. I recognize some of you. So I'm a real estate agent, so hopefully he didn't put doom and gloom in too much of you guys. But if everything gets solved and you still want to sell your house, let me know. I'll help you out. Yeah, I figured I'd try. And then to the lady that asked about the landlord question, I deal with a lot of rental houses myself. I would recommend putting your money into escrow. That's going to force your landlord, and it'll put them in court at that point, and then you can tell them, well, here's the reason why I want my drinking water, and then they can go from there. Anyway, point being, so I have a couple questions. One, which maybe not too many people are going to want to hear. Purdue is a major employer around here. Mm-hmm. What if it's cheaper for them just to pick up and move to a different facility? Is there something that locks them into this area so people don't lose their jobs?
It's not.
Okay.
Okay, they've been here longer than most anybody's been here. Okay, that stadium, that baseball stadium,
yeah,
they built it.
Yeah.
The business school, they built it. They're going nowhere. Okay, we've taken on some of the biggest corporations really in the country. Mount Air is the 5th largest chicken producer. And you know what we tell every corporate defendant when we start every case? We're not here to put you out of business. That's the worst thing we can do for you, the defendant, and the worst thing we can do for our clients, the community. We're simply here to fix the problem. You can make millions and billions of dollars a year. You just need to do it in an environmentally responsible way. You're gonna have to invest in your own business and clean it up, but you can still be very profitable.
And then,
so nobody needs to worry about that.
Gotcha.
We've never put a defendant into bankruptcy.
Thank you. Another question. There's a difference between irrigation wells and your regular home well as far as depths. So if the water seeps, or how far does the chemicals seep into the ground? Next thing you know, home irrigation water is being spread all over the place. Does that make the circle bigger? And then for homes that are on a more shallow well compared to a deeper well, does it affect them differently as far as water well depths?
So as for the last part, yes, it can affect it differently if you have shallow well versus deeper well. Right now, we don't have enough information on how quickly the contamination is diving to know, but most of the wells in this neighborhood, in these areas, are screened roughly in the same depths, but we don't really know all the details yet.
And then I live, I'll give my address, don't nobody come to my house, please. 402 Ethel's Way. It's actually right on Peggy's Branch. Peggy's Branch comes right on it. Beautiful stream, actually. Tons of wildlife, etc. I never actually got a letter from Purdue, which is kind of odd, seeing that it's like Parker Road was the line that all the letters stopped going to. I just didn't know why, they deemed Parker Road being the line, as Parker's Manor didn't get any letter. So I just didn't know if you knew why.
We don't.
I think that's their line.
Yeah.
Right? It's not our line.
No, I'm not saying you. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
in general, why would they consider that?
We don't know.
Okay, all right. And then joining that, even though I'm not in that area, I could still join since being
Yes.
on. And then if you guys wanted to come and test, just so you can use it for your map.
Thank you.
Let me know. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. My husband and I live a quarter of a mile north of the Purdue Mill, directly across the street, I believe, from the fields and the wooded area that they spread irrigation on. But I don't have any driving desire to crucify Purdue. The Purdue industry has allowed many people in this room, faces that I see and I recognize, as local farmers. Purdue has provided an income for them for their entire careers, and none of us want to see that industry ruined. What you've told me so far tonight is how good you all are at doing your jobs and suing this industry. But that's not what I have a question about. I have two questions. Sure. One of them is the maps that have been drawn up. I know they're based on the aquifer. Our well was tested last week. We have no results yet. We have two wells on our farm. One supplies our home. The other supplies our livestock that we eventually eat or someone else eats. And it supplies our garden, which we eventually eat. That well was not tested, and we were told it could not be tested under the current
Who told you that?
the guys who came out to test it, who scheduled it.
From Purdue?
Huh?
From Purdue? Yeah.
Who was it?
Yeah, I got two wells on my property too, and they only tested one in front.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
I told them the second one was for irrigation and for water my animals, and they said, if we have to, we'll come back later and test that, we just want you drinking water right now.
So apparently that question applies to a lot of people. Any well on the properties that are in that aquifer and on the edge of it should be tested that supply any living being or vegetables on that farm that provide human consumption. And the other part of that same question is the way the maps were drawn up, it is so absolute. I know many families who own rental homes, that the rental homes, their primary homes aren't in the aquifer. Rental homes that they have that are rented to young families with babies and young children, and they have asked to have those properties tested. Some of them as close as directly across the road from the Purdue plant to the east, and so far have not been given approval to have those tested. And they know they have young families renting there. On the other side, on the west side of Purdue, just off of Parker Road, we know people who are right across the street from where the aquifer ends in those developments, and they have not been granted testing. One individual has called 5 different numbers trying to find out if she can have her water tested because she has 2 young grandchildren living in her home. And the answer has been consistently no,
the answer
or
from
no
who?
response.
The answer from who?
Purdue.
Pardon me?
Who says they can't have their who says they can't have the water tested?
They called the number that Purdue put out on the initial thing. They called the Maryland Department of Environment.
So why do you
they
think
called-
we're here? We're here to test people's water,
Okay.
okay? To try to create what is the most accurate impact zone. Somebody said before, you know, it's the fox watching the hen house. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And if it stays that way, the problem will continue. You know, if you let us come in and let us fix the problem, and don't worry about Purdue. We're not putting them out of business. Frankly, I happen to think it's a good company that does a lot of good.
Yep,
They're
they do.
very philanthropic, they're very community-oriented. I just hope they step up and do the right thing here. But yes, we're gonna try to make sure that everybody who has contaminated water, especially those with young children, but everybody, gets clean water as soon as possible.
But you mentioned that those outside of the mapping parameter for the aquifer
There
won't
i-
be tested
the-
until it shows that people all the way to the edge of the aquifer are affected. In the meantime, what kind of support are they being given for drinking water?
Well, I would think Purdue would give them drinking water, but that's on Purdue. And they can certainly buy bottled water, and people are free to get their own wells tested if they can afford to do so.
Right.
And we're moving as quickly as humanly possible, frankly.
Okay. And my other question, we're looking solely at Purdue for being responsible for this. And yes, they are. If you can prove that soybean production, processing, oil processing is what created this problem. But all of these agricultural industries are supposed to be monitored by a government environmental various testing things. As long as Purdue has been processing soybean and producing soybean oil and not having a major change in the process that they're using, as well as other crops, corn, everything else, has no agency that reviews their safety ever tested their water until this came up for their new well?
We don't know, but when we do our discovery and MDE gives us the documents we've asked for, and we start getting documents from Purdue and taking depositions, we'll find out.
We
need to
do.
go to the next individual, because there's a pretty long line.
Well,
Thank
let me
you.
just add real quickly that EPA, ma'am, as you saw, EPA did not develop these regulations until the last couple of years. So I think it's unlikely that MDE was testing for these substances. They were testing for other things, but not this.
Thank you for your question. If everybody can maybe just limit their question, maybe one, that way we can filter through everyone. Thank you.
So I didn't know much when I came here tonight. I just came for general interest. I've been in my home for 16 years. My 6-year-old daughter lives there with me and my wife. And I didn't know anything about what it was or the affected area until tonight. My well is less than 100 feet south of Peggy's Branch, and both my wife and I have suffered health effects listed on your brochure. How quickly could I get my water tested, and who do I need to talk to?
Yeah, in terms of how quickly can you get your water tested, I mean, the testing that we're going to do is going to be dictated by our hydrogeology team, right? Which is, we're being, specific and strategic about where we go and why we go, because we're trying to identify the impact area. So I can't tell you for sure whether or not your well will be tested or a well on your street even.
Do I get on a list, or do I just wait for somebody to knock on my door?
Yeah, I mean, what I would do is I would see our staff out front, okay, make sure that we have your name, your contact information, all of that information. And, we can definitely talk to our hydrogeology team about where you live to make sure, if we've tested, for example, somebody 3 doors down from you, it's unlikely we're going to test your specific well. But also, too, if you go to our website, it has some information about where you can get your own tests.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I'll try to be brief. I'm Rick from Heather Glen. Just a couple of issues here I want to ask you about. So Purdue has reached out a couple of times to take steps, whether it's drinking water being provided, or we just got a letter today that said if your water tests hot, then we may install a treatment system at your home. If that's the case, it sounds like it's not going to constitute a waiver of rights to accept those things, but how cautious should we be to have to read the fine print on anything when accepting those so that we don't waive our rights?
You have to be very cautious about reading the fine print to make sure that you're not waiving your right to participate in this lawsuit.
And if you have, I tell you, if you have any doubt, send it to us. We'll read it for you.
Okay. And in addition to that, I've received several mailers from various firms. I don't know if they've teamed up with you. I don't know if they're independent teams trying to jump onto the lawsuit. My experience is, not beyond Aaron Brockovich. So how does that affect the case if several other law firms become involved in this? Is that a possibility? I don't know how that works.
Well, the 2 law firms that have sent flyers out are firms that I've worked with for years. One is the Peter Angelo's firm. Peter was a good friend of mine. He died a couple, I guess it's been about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And his firm actually was sold to another lawyer named Jay Miller. But they're in Baltimore, I know them very well. And the other firm is Baird and Budd, and I worked with them in the Jewel litigation. Again, I think you just want to, we don't want to toot our own horn. But if you go to our website and look at what we've done environmentally, especially in this area, and compare it to those law firms, I think you'll make the right decision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I will need your help over a minute.
I'm sorry, sir, we can't hear you.
I said I could need your help a little bit. I have a hard time talking. What to do with vegetables? We make a lot every year, store them up, can them. Now, what to do? Throw away?
I'm not sure, I couldn't hear.
I couldn't either.
I'm sorry, sir, we can't hear you.
I can a lot of vegetables every year. Now, do we throw away?
I understood. You can a lot of vegetables, and should you throw them away?
Yes.
That's a good question. Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay.
I can't tell you for sure they're contaminated, but if they're vegetables that you grow and you water those vegetables,
And you're in the
and you're in the impact area or close to the impact area, I would not eat them.
Yeah. Okay. Could get compensated for that from Purdue?
That would be part of your specific request for compensation, sure.
Okay. Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I understand that there are a lot of these corporations that this situation has happened to, could have in the past, and this is going back decades, could have put water filtration systems on their wastewater systems, and this kind of thing wouldn't be happening.
That's 100% correct.
We agree with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Purdue.
I'm a landlord, and I have this home about 4 houses down from Purdue plant, and about 4 or 5 houses from the headquarters. I have a family renting this property. What do I tell them about when they want to take a shower with those children and the family?
Has the well been tested for this property?
No. We just got the letter, that's it.
Okay.
But
And-
when I go back and tell that family, what am I supposed to say to them about, you can't take a shower, or can you take a shower?
I think
And have
the
kids that
first thing you ought to
doing
tell them is do not drink the water. They ought to use bottled water.
Yeah.
That you should tell them. In
I
terms
can
of
tell them that, what's gonna happen to me by, they telling me that, we wanna take showers, we wanna take baths.
yeah, and as Deborah pointed out, as long as you're not drinking the water when you shower or drinking the water when you're bathing, I don't think for this limited period of time, it's going to make a significant difference.
Right.
But one of the things is that as a landlord you should be looking into is a filtration system for the house.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I said one of the things that you should be looking into as a landlord is a filtration system for the house, a point of source filtration system.
I can see that for the water, but showers too?
Correct, yeah.
The filter is where the water comes into the house, not just at your kitchen sink. It's a household filtration system.
So that's something that I should do right now then?
I would.
Yes.
You have to make sure that it addresses these chemicals, because you can't just go to Lowe's and buy a filtration system.
I mean, I can, but I'm so close to both of those, the plant and the
Yep.
headquarters, so I'm pretty sure.
Thank you.
My question is along those lines as well. I can look online and look at all these filtration systems, but you need to be a scientist to freaking understand what you're buying. So my question is, like, do point of entry systems, under normal circumstances, they remove, I'm sure, certain type, certain amounts of chemicals, but us being over 700, what system do we, can you put out information where we can go to specific places to ask for something that's going to actually attack these chemicals?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is no. I mean, we're not experts in the filtration system themselves, but I mean, what you want to be looking at is filtration systems, and I think they're the best is what, carbon fiber, that deal with PFAS.
But what I'm saying is, like, when I'm looking at that stuff online, it doesn't specify, like, oh, it says it takes care of forever chemicals, but is that like forever chemicals, like a certain amount of chemicals? It doesn't even state the amount that it would cover and take care of.
Yeah, and I think that's indicative of the fact that this is such a new problem, and the regulations are new, and the technology is sort of still catching up.
Okay, and then
But the box that the filter comes in should say what chemicals it deals with. So make sure it says PFAS and the 3 different components of PFAS that are involved in this case.
like the carbon activated and also the reverse osmosis?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it is unfortunately frequently requested now of installers of filtration systems to have PFAS removal. So they should be used to the request, and you just specify, I want a system that removes PFAS.
Okay.
And then find out how often you need to maintain
Change
it
the
as well.
Maintain it, okay. And then my last question is, I know this is all new, and it's been less than a month that you guys started on this. But going forward, I know this is just a civil suit, but is there gonna be eventually like a criminal suit? Like a criminal charges against people for all these years?
We're not criminal lawyers.
Okay,
Okay, so we really are not in a position to answer that question.
okay, all right.
Just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you specialize in every area of the law.
You're
Sor-
smart,
sorta
get out of here with that.
Sort of like medicine, right? But we're civil lawyers, and we specialize in environmental litigation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
I know that Purdue is the offender here, but I'll have to think that there's an organization that should be testing them. I know that Purdue is the offender here, but I would have to think that there should have been testing over the years. If that organization has not been doing their job, would they also be a co-defendant?
Which organization?
If you're talking about the regulatory agency, the MDE, the Maryland Department of the Environment, because they're a state organization, they operate with a great deal of governmental immunity. Yeah, governmental immunity. And the reality is, there's no viable way to sue them that would be effective and would really help the process. It would just slow the process down.
Thank you.
There's a lot of questions that I could ask, but I'm only going to ask one. These forever chemicals, are they an integral part of the production of their products?
No.
What?
No, we think, we're just beginning to figure out what the source of this
So we don't know if
is.
they actually needed these chemicals.
No, don't jump ahead here.
Okay.
What I'm saying is they're no longer produced in the U.S., these chemicals, so they're no longer used in that sense. On the other hand, we don't know the origins of the soy, for example. We don't know enough about the internal process to know where this came from, but it's not a currently used chemical.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope this will be short. My west boundary line is Zion Church Road. I live about
I'm sorry, sir. Can you speak into the microphone? Yeah.
I live just north of the plant on Zion Church Road. I live on the east side of the road. My property line is the road on the west side. The east side is Middle Neck Creek. Is that water flow you're talking about east to west, is that eliminate me? Is that water all going to go away from me or not?
The answer is we don't know. What we know is that, generally, as Dr. Cohen talked about, it flows east to west with a little bit of a southerly tint. But we have conducted some testing on the east side of the plant. We haven't gotten those well tests back yet. So we don't know whether or not where you are will be ultimately in the impact area.
How am I going to know then if my water is contaminated? Because I've not been notified to be tested.
What we will be doing is as we continue to test and as we continue our investigation and as the shape of the impact zone changes and probably increases in size, we will continue to push that information out to the community. And you should be able to see it on our website. You should be able to, you'll probably get something in the mail that'll show the change.
Yeah, just to follow up on that a little bit, one of the things that we do is for any of, any community members that sign up with our law firm and become a client, we regularly send out update letters. We try to do it every 60 days, if not shorter than that. And part of that, since we are so early on into this investigation, it will give updates on testing that's been done, to the extent that the area of impact changes, those types of things. So, it's really important that if you want to be sort of on the inside of getting that information, to sign up with us.
I better do that then, because I don't compute.
Thank you.
Get that.
Mr. Federico,
Yeah.
first of all, I want to apologize because I'm going to get very descriptive here, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. But people need to know, and people need to know what's ahead of them. So they need to fight this. 4 years ago, I had to have my colon removed because of cancer. So now I don't use the bathroom like normal people. I wear this. And it just came loose while we're sitting here. And it leaked all over my clothes. You live like this every day. And see how you handle it. It's horrific every time. Sometimes I have to find a restroom right away, and sometimes I don't make it, and I have these messes to tend to. My skin is raw because this sticks to your stomach. It's changed my life completely. I hate every minute of it. It's not an easy road. It is a horrible road. Of course, there's worse things in life, but I only know about this. I'm sure that all this has participated in my issue. Look at this, I'm shaking like a leaf, because this isn't me to get up here.
Well,
But people need to know what they could be in for. I just came out of the restroom. Again, like I said, my stomach's raw from the glue.
Well, I want to, on behalf of our group, and to everybody who's still here, I want to thank you for getting up and speaking to us. It takes a lot of courage, frankly.
Well, I believe in justice and doing the right thing. And I can pretty much guarantee at 75 years old, Purdue already has a plan, and it's not for our benefit. So, and we live slightly out of that range. So guys, good luck.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you very
comments
much.
tonight.
Hi. I actually lived in an area where TCE was found in our wells recently, well, within the past 10 years here in Wicomico County. There was nobody who could be blamed for it, so we didn't have attorneys come in and help us out. But it was resolved. But I do know that in that case, the MDE did test our wells, but they had protocols and labs that were certified to do that. I don't think that there are a number of labs that are certified to test for PFAS yet by the EPA or the state of Maryland. So I'm curious about who's doing the testing of the PFAS at this point.
No, that's a great question. There actually are labs, national and local labs that are certified for PFAS. And as far as the testing that we're doing on the behalf of this group, it's going to a lab called Eurofins, which is an
Okay.
international laboratory, and they are certified for PFAS. So we're using a methodology that's approved by the EPA.
All
So
right,
it's the most reliable methodology for drinking water.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, first and foremost. Two-part quick question. The litigation that your group was in reference to the Mount Air project in Millsboro, can you give me an actual parameter on how long from beginning to end that whole process took?
We started investigating that case in November of 2017. We reached a settlement on November 13th of 2020. The settlement was approved in April of 2021.
So three and a half years, give or take.
Yeah, I mean,
But to put it in context, that was a case where, at the outset, Mount Air was not admitting that they created the problem. They were defending the case vigorously, and then we went through a lot of litigation that ate up a lot of that time.
Understandable. Second part, when you were talking about everybody that's in the affected area, whether they own a home or they were like a tenant or something of that nature, do you have any idea, number-wise, how far back we should go? Say from today, 10 years back, if you were in this designated area, 15 years back, just so all of us here have a rough estimate in our head of a number that we can go off of.
You know, we suspect that it could go back. Not it does, but it could go back as far as 1985, but we don't know for sure.
Okay.
Again, we're just starting.
No, yeah, I understand we're really fresh out the gate here. It's
Yeah.
only 24 days.
But as that number changes, if it does, and as our map changes,
Mhm.
again, if you're a client, you're going to get a letter every month or every other month that will share that information.
Okay, so just use 85 as the bearing and then go from there.
I would.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.
Good evening. My name is Bob Souza. I'm a resident of Nottingham Woods, which we are bordered by the Middle Neck Branch to the south, right along our subdivision line, and Parker Road. Please excuse my accent. As you can tell, I'm a Yankee. I've only been here 28 years, and I haven't lost the accent. If you need an interpreter, I'll find one. So we're not tested, and I know members of the HOA know that I have been involved with this as an executive facilities manager, director for casinos, school systems, all kinds of stuff. So I've been involved with water, above ground, 100,000 gallon water tanks, all kinds of stuff. And I think people have to stop, take a deep breath, and just listen to what's out there. This is a very open, fresh wound. We just made the cut on our finger, and it hasn't even had a chance to heal. Through my connections with MDE, the county, I don't have many. My wife and I, my son have been here 28 years, and none of us are associated with Purdue in any way. None of us have worked there, and we know several people, but I mean, we have no affiliation with Purdue. Do I believe that Purdue will do the right thing? I think they already have. They're a company that has a big investment in this community, and they're not going to mess it up. They're just not going to mess it up. I think they're going to take ownership of what has to be done, and they're doing it. I know in Nottingham Woods, the paleo aquifer, which is crazy, and people, you just have to understand some of this stuff. Half of our subdivision is in the paleo, half of it isn't. However, sand is sand, water is water. Who knows the exact limit of the paleo aquifer? I did a lot of investigation and actually found the person in charge up at MDE to deal with. The explanation to me and the person from Purdue, the county's basically out of it. They've left it up to MDE and Purdue to resolve this problem, which totally understand, is that the reason they haven't gone to Nottingham Woods or expanded out the half-mile area is they're trying to get a matrix of what and how far out this thing is expanding. And you can't do it without data. I think all you scientists know that. You can't do it without data. You have to do wells, you have to look at it, you have to see where it drops off. So I can only say for people to be patient, and let's see how this unfolds. You know, when PFAS, well, it's PFAS, PFAS, there's a whole bunch of polyfluoros. The octane one is basically stuff that's in your clothes, wrinkle-free. It's in your cookware. It's in everything that surrounds us. Tons of things in this room. Thank God the PFAS, the octane one, is something that can only hurt you if it's alluvial. It's not going to, you're not going to digest, well, you could digest it, I guess, but it's not going to go dermally through your system and all that stuff. But we have to be patient. I really believe Purdue is going to do the right thing. I had a resident
Can I
come
interrupt
up.
you just for a second?
Yeah.
We do have a line of people behind you.
Okay.
And no, this is what you say is, a lot of it's very accurate and very helpful, and it is helping the group understand, but this is a little bit of a question and answer session. And we do want to get to everybody.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hello.
I just want to make sure I understand this. You're saying that 20% of this runoff has caused this calamity. So the other 80% that is going down Peggy Branch into the river, is your purview going to extend out to the greater areas and out into the river to see if we have this stuff contaminating the bigger area?
We're going to test until we find clean water.
Okay.
Okay? We have this gentleman here who's one of the country's leading hydrogeologists to guide us. And we will pinpoint where it stops, but it's going to take some time. It's going to take a
But
lot
so
of testing.
you're going to check out the river then, right?
Well, the water that's in the river is
It's tidal, yeah.
presumably not water that people are drinking. We're most concerned right now about the groundwater and the drinking water. But we're going to test wells until we get to clean water.
Okay. So it flows through a big area to get there. There's a lot of space to cover.
There
Big
is.
area to look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just real quick, what do we do about our animals? We bathe them, they drink the water. What do we do? I mean, mine is now, she drinks bottled water, but I still give her a bath at home. She'll still lap the water out of the tub when you give her a bath or lick it off the wall.
You know, I would just tell you that EPA says, so this is what they say, that there's a relatively low risk through your skin. The big risk is through drinking water. So be sure to give the bottled water to your animals.
Yeah,
I'd
because
say.
I mean, I know somebody right now that's lost 2 animals that was drinking the water. All right, thank you.
Hello, I have a follow-up question to the statement that this may go back to 1984. We have adult children that no longer live in our home, but they grew up in our home. Should they also fill out this paperwork and become a part of this too?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, first question is Purdue still spraying the water down into Peggy Neck Branch? And the reason I say that, my well is 50 feet from the branch. As dry as this area has been over the last few months, I have water flowing behind my house.
Yes, I think that's a good indication that they still are discharging. The best information we have is they've not connected it to any other public sewer, so that means they're still having to discharge to Peggy's Branch.
In the late 80s, early 90s, when the oil refinery was first built, I hauled crude oil into that facility. And I've seen them load tanker trucks and rail cars and have an overspill and watched it wash down the drain with a steam hose.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about like is it a whole house water filtration system?
Yes, that or point of entry. Yeah.
So it treats your water as it comes into the house?
Correct,
Because we
correct.
just installed one at our house. We also have our 2-year-old grandson who lives with us, and you were saying earlier that smaller children they're smaller, so they can take up the chemicals more than adults. And he's a 2-year-old, so his skin's, you know, a lot softer than my skin. And I'm just wondering what are the, and I know you probably can't answer this question, I'm just worried about him, especially him. I'm worried about my wife, my daughter, my mother-in-law lives with us also. And so we got a house full, but, you know, all the way from 81 all the way down to 2 years old. So I'm concerned.
So did you get a filtration system
We've
installed?
just installed a whole house filtration system, but it was before all this stuff started happening.
Okay.
It's a carbon one, and I don't know if it's for PFAS or not. I can't imagine it is if this has only been going on for 3 years.
Well,
know.
activated carbon will treat for PFAS.
It will.
Yeah, absolutely. And the
Okay.
important thing is to talk to the manufacturer
Okay.
and just find out what they recommend for the frequency of carbon change out.
Okay.
To make sure because you have to refresh the carbon every now and then, so
Yeah.
it keeps treating the water. That's the important thing, but that's the right technology for a house.
And I don't mean to ask another question, but I saw an article, and it said of the different steps and things that could be done, and that is like the filtration systems, the cleaning up of the ground and the groundwater, kind of like what you all were saying. And then it had mentioned public water being provided. Well, that would be like from the municipality in Salisbury. And this contamination extends into the Salisbury City Parks well field. So it's a possibility that the PFAS could contaminate the city of Salisbury's well houses in that field.
Well, we don't know that this contamination is at their well
I
field
looked
yet.
at the map, and it ended up right in the
Right,
park.
but just that's the area of concern. We don't know that it's actually been
Okay,
contaminated yet.
I got you.
Yeah,
I
but
understand.
having said that, the city, like any public water system, is required to monitor for these chemicals. And if they have impacts, they will treat it before
Yeah.
distributing it. So that's why.
Not that I want to be on city water at all.
Right.
We live outside in the county. We like it in the county. But when we heard this about our water, it has all of us alarmed. We've lived there for 25 years. Just up until recently, we just installed this whole house filtration system. So for the remainder of the time, we've all been showering. We've not been drinking because the water just tastes terrible. But we've been showering, we've been brushing our teeth, we've been watering our vegetables, and I heard you say you probably should not eat the vegetables that you've been watering. You've been putting that water on, so, sorry, I didn't mean to be so lengthy, but I'm concerned about especially my 2-year-old grandson.
Well, it's a good thing you got a filter. Just change it when the manufacturer tells you to.
Yep.
Thank you for your comments. And we're going to wrap this up in about 10 minutes or so. If everybody could just ask one question.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Chris Van Dyke. I live in Nottingham Woods. My house backs up very close to Middle Neck Branch. I wanted to ask about timeframes. You've already said that sometimes these take years to resolve, some of these suits. What happens, is there a time limit on settlements? And if symptoms from exposure to these PFAS chemicals appear after that time limit, what happens then?
Well, if and when this case resolves, and we believe it will, I mean, it's always our goal to fix the problem as quickly as we can. So it's going to depend a great deal on the amount of cooperation we get from Purdue. If they say, look, we don't want to fight you in court, we want to work with you to fix the problem, let's come up with a remediation plan, let's figure out how we're going to fund it, let's make sure it is a permanent fix. You know, that's one thing. You know, that could take a year, maybe 2. If they say, you know, we're going to slug this out in court, it could take 3 or 4 or 5 years before we solve the problem. And that's really a little bit out of our control. We will push as hard as we can. We will do whatever we can to make this go away sooner as opposed to later. But to some extent, we're at the mercy of Purdue and the court system.
Yes. So my question is more about the settlement afterwards. After whatever happens, if any health concerns arise.
Well, I mean, after the settlement, there'll be a medical monitoring program that'll be funded So you can participate in the medical monitoring program if you want. It'll be fully funded. You can be tested for all these diseases that are causally related. So that's something that'll happen very quickly after the settlement is over. In terms of people actually getting paid for the diminution of their property value, and for those who've had health problems as a result that are related, there'll be what's called an allocation program, and there will be a allocator or a team of allocators responsible for making sure that the proceeds from the settlement are appropriately and equitably distributed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I make one small statement? If anybody has seen the movie Dark Waters, it's about the DuPont contamination from Delaware down to West Virginia. Watch it and pay good attention to it. That's what's happening.
Thank you.
I think it's on Netflix.
Hi.
Good afternoon. My name's Jessica. I did get, my house is in one of the letters that was sent out. We got a notification from Purdue today about like the water system that they're offering to put in, which I know that they will send to you guys and you guys can read it, make sure that there's nothing, no issue with it. But if it's a reverse osmosis system, does that effectively remove these chemicals?
It can, yeah. Again, there's multiple technologies, including reverse osmosis, carbon, ion exchange resins, typically not used in a small house, in-house system, but there are multiple technologies. So we want to confirm as a group here, I think, and also with the manufacturers that it is the right technology for your house to treat PFAS, but there are multiple options. Yeah.
Okay, so in theory, it would be safe to drink the water if I get that system?
Yep.
Awesome,
Yes.
thank you.
Good evening. My question is, well, twofold. I live in Heather Glen. I have had a private well test for anybody that's interested. Maryland Water Testing Labs right here in Salisbury will do a test for you. It's $470. My test did come back positive for 3 of the PFAS that you guys have been talking about. I have also done a little research, and there are several water companies in Salisbury that will do the carbon system, which is a point of entry. It's out in your garage. It treats the bath water, your faucets, as opposed to reverse osmosis is only under one sink. So that's the only water it's treating is at one sink. My question is, I'm probably not going to wait out a year-long settlement. If I go ahead and do this, what recourse do I have to get reimbursed for the system if I do it, or do I not? It's just my prerogative to do that.
If you participate in, you can fix, anybody in this room can do exactly what you're doing. They can pay if they can afford to, they can get their water tested as soon as possible, they can put in a point of entry filtration system. There's not much you can do about your diminution of your property. You know, but anybody can do that. Most people, unfortunately, are not in a position to do that. But you can recoup everything you've spent. So if any of you are spending money on bottled water yourselves, whatever you're spending money on that you weren't spending money on before because of this problem, keep your receipts, keep track of it, and give copies to us, and we will make it part of the damages portion of the case. So yes, you can get all your money back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, last question.
We have MDE, and we have that's a state. We have the EPA, federal. Funny, our court systems are going to set up that way. And then you have these forever chemicals, PFAS, and the way they get studied, somebody shows an association, someone gets better data, and you call it a correlation, and then it gets kicked to the lawyers, and it becomes causation. So has any court or any other than the EPA found PFAS or PFAS forever chemicals damaging to a human being and money handed over because of it?
Yes.
All right, is it on, can you quote it so that we know it really, because right now you're just throwing groundwater contamination, doesn't sound specific enough to this situation.
Well, I mean, the The lady here just gave you, I mean, you can watch Dark Waters and you'll see.
Watch Dark Waters.
Yeah, you'll see the
Dark
case,
Waters
you'll
is-
see the first case. Yeah, and it's,
Okay.
there's been many since then.
Yeah.
Not to discredit you guys, I just wanted to, you
No,
know,
I-
people to
it's
know
okay.
that-
believe me, I wouldn't be up here if it doesn't work. It works.
Thank you.
Oh, one more.
Quick one. We don't own property there now, but I grew up on Parker Road, and I lived there 20 years. My mom and dad lived there 40 years. And do we have any rights as far as finding out when results are in that area? Do we have a way to find that out? And my dad actually passed away of cancer in 2013 when they were living there. So I don't know, like I said, we don't currently own anything, and we haven't gotten any notice, obviously, because we don't live there anymore, but.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to fill out the questionnaire that we have out there. I would
Okay.
encourage you to sign up. You'll be on the inside. You'll get all the updates from us.
Okay.
The class will
Thank you.
include people who used to live here but no longer live here
Yeah.
for as far back as we determine.
Because my daughter, granddaughter, and son-in-law live in the area now, so they've been there 4 years, so they're affected, but I feel like I was there 20. I don't
You're
know how long-
eligible.
How long it's been going on, but, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.